In a small, quiet town where everyone seemed to know each other's secrets, there lived a boy named Ethan. He was only 13 years old, but his life was far from ordinary. Most kids his age spent their days playing games, riding bikes, or dreaming about the future. But for Ethan, childhood felt like a distant memory, a luxury he couldn't afford. His father had walked out on the family when Ethan was just 6, leaving behind an empty chair at the dinner table and a mountain of unpaid bills. Since then, it had been just him, his mother, and his little sister Lily. Ethan's mother worked tirelessly at the local diner, serving meals to others while her own children often went without. She did her best, but between long hours and mounting stress, she barely had time to breathe. When she fell ill one winter, everything changed overnight. The doctor said she needed rest, but resting meant no income, and no income meant no food on the table. Without hesitation, Ethan stepped up. Though he was still a child himself, he took on the role of caregiver, ensuring that Lily never went hungry or felt unloved. Every morning began the same way for Ethan. Before the sun rose, he would wake up, tiptoeing around the tiny apartment so as not to disturb his sleeping mother. He'd heat some water on the stove for oatmeal, carefully measuring out portions since they couldn't afford much. Then he'd wake Lily with a gentle shake and a smile. "Rise and shine, Lil Sunshine," he'd say, using the nickname he'd given her when she was born. No matter how tired he felt, seeing her face light up made it all worthwhile. After breakfast, Ethan walked Lily to her elementary school, holding her hand tightly as they crossed busy streets. Once she was safely inside, he hurried to his own school, trying to ignore the rumbling in his stomach. By the time he arrived, the hallways were already buzzing with chatter and laughter. But Ethan didn't join in. Instead, he kept to himself, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might notice the patches on his clothes or the frayed edges of his shoes. The bullies noticed, though. They always did. To them, Ethan was an easy target, someone who wouldn't fight back. They called him names like Trash Boy and laughed whenever he passed by. Sometimes they'd trip him in the hallway or knock his books out of his hands. One day during lunch, they even stole the sandwich he'd packed for himself, tossing it back and forth like a game. Ethan stood frozen, watching helplessly as crumbs scattered across the floor. He wanted to scream, to shout, to tell them how unfair it all was. But he couldn't. Not because he was afraid of getting hurt, but because if he got into trouble, who would take care of Lily? Despite the pain and humiliation, Ethan never let his guard down. He knew that showing weakness would only give the bullies more ammunition. So he endured their taunts silently, keeping his head down and focusing on what truly mattered. Getting through each day so he could be there for his sister. Little did the bullies know, the boy they mocked carried a strength they could never understand. While they wasted their days teasing others, Ethan was building a life out of love, sacrifice, and sheer determination. And though it wasn't easy, he held on to hope that someday things would get better. The bullying didn't stop after that first day. If anything, it got worse. Ethan tried to stay out of sight, keeping his head down and avoiding areas where the older boys usually hung out. But no matter how hard he tried, they always seemed to find him. It was almost as if they enjoyed making his life miserable, feeding off his silence like it gave them power. One afternoon during recess, Ethan sat alone under a tree near the edge of the schoolyard. He had brought a small notebook with him, one he used to jot down reminders for Lily, things like picking her up from school or buying milk on the way home. Writing helped him focus, giving him a brief escape from the chaos around him. But today, peace was short-lived. Marcus, the leader of the bullies, spotted him from across the yard. With a smirk, he motioned to his friends, and together they sauntered over. "Well, well, look who's hiding over here," Marcus said loudly, drawing stares from nearby students. "What are you doing, Trash Boy? Writing love letters?" His friends laughed at the joke, though none of them really knew what was written in the notebook. Ethan ignored them, clutching the book tightly against his chest. He didn't want trouble, he just wanted to be left alone. But Marcus wasn't done. He reached out and snatched the notebook from Ethan's hands before he could react. Flipping through the pages, he read aloud in a mocking tone. Pick up bread, check Lily's homework, wash uniforms. Wow, this is sad. You're not even a kid anymore. You're like some old man stuck in a kid's body. More laughter erupted from the group, and Ethan felt his face burn with shame. He hated being humiliated in front of everyone. But what could he do? Fighting back would only make things worse. Marcus tossed the notebook onto the ground and stepped on it, grinding his shoe into the cover until it bent and tore. Ethan clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. Inside, he felt a storm brewing, a mix of anger, frustration, and helplessness. But instead of lashing out, he bent down and picked up the damaged notebook, brushing dirt off the pages. As he stood up, Marcus shoved him backward, sending him stumbling into the tree trunk behind him. You're such a loser, Marcus sneered, leaning closer. No wonder your dad left. Who'd want to stick around with someone like you? Those words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. For a moment he froze, memories of his father flooding back. The pain of abandonment still lingered deep inside, raw and unresolved. Marcus must have seen the flicker of hurt in Ethan's eyes because his grin widened. What's wrong, trash boy? Cat got your tongue? Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to lose control, not now, not ever. If he retaliated, he'd end up in detention or worse, suspended. And if that happened, who would take care of Lily? So he swallowed his pride, turned away, and walked toward the school building without saying a word. Behind him, Marcus and his gang laughed, calling him weak and pathetic. But Ethan didn't care about their opinions. All that mattered was getting through the day, surviving another round of torment and making sure Lily was safe and happy when he saw her next. As he entered the hallway, Ethan leaned against the wall for a moment, closing his eyes. His heart pounded in his chest and his hands trembled slightly. He hated feeling powerless, but he reminded himself why he endured all of this. Every insult, every shove, it was a price he paid willingly for Lily's sake. She depended on him, trusted him, loved him unconditionally. That thought kept him going, even when the weight of everything threatened to crush him. Later that evening, as Ethan tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. You're the best big brother in the whole world, she whispered, hugging her stuffed bear close. Ethan smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. In that moment, surrounded by her warmth and trust, he found strength again. The bullies might mock him, but they didn't know the truth. They didn't understand the sacrifices he made or the love that fueled him. And maybe, just maybe, that was something worth holding on to. Ethan's life was a whirlwind of responsibilities, but there was one thing that kept him grounded: his little sister, Lily. She was only 6 years old, with curly hair that bounced when she ran, and big, curious eyes that seemed to sparkle even on the darkest days. To Ethan, she wasn't just his sibling. She was his reason to keep going, his light in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. Every evening after finishing their homework by candlelight, because the electricity bill hadn't been paid in weeks, Ethan made it a point to read bedtime stories to Lily. He borrowed books from the library, choosing tales of brave knights, magical kingdoms, and daring adventures. As he flipped through the pages, his voice steady and soothing, Lily would snuggle under the thin blanket they shared, completely captivated. For those few minutes each night, the worries of the day faded away. There were no bullies, no empty cupboards, no looming bills, just the two of them, lost in a story. Lily adored her big brother more than anyone else in the world. To her, Ethan wasn't Trash Boy, the name the kids at school called him. He wasn't the quiet, scrawny kid who got pushed around in the hallways. To her, he was a superhero. When she drew pictures at school, she always included Ethan, drawing him taller than everyone else with a cape flowing behind him. Once, when her teacher asked why she drew him like that, Lily had proudly declared, "Because my brother is strong. He takes care of me and makes sure I'm okay." Ethan didn't see himself as a hero, though. He saw himself as someone doing what needed to be done. But deep down, Lily's unwavering faith in him meant everything. On the hardest days, when the weight of responsibility pressed down so heavily he could barely breathe, he thought about her smile, the way her whole face lit up whenever he walked through the door. It reminded him that he wasn't alone, that someone depended on him, and that gave him strength. One chilly winter night, as they sat together on the creaky couch in their tiny living room, Lily looked up at Ethan with a serious expression. "Brother," she said, tugging on his sleeve, "do you think we'll ever live in a castle?" Ethan chuckled softly, ruffling her hair. "Maybe someday, Lil Sunshine," he replied. "But until then, this apartment is our castle and you're the princess." Lily giggled, clapping her hands. "And you're the king," she added excitedly. For a moment, Ethan let himself imagine it, a real castle, far away from the struggles of their current life. In this fantasy, there was plenty of food, warm clothes, and no bullies waiting to taunt him at school. But as quickly as the thought came, it vanished. Reality had a way of pulling him back, reminding him of the sacrifices he still needed to make. Still, he smiled at Lily and nodded. "Yeah, I guess I'm the king," he said playfully, earning another giggle from her. As the nights grew colder and money became even tighter, Ethan found creative ways to make Lily happy. One weekend, when they couldn't afford groceries, he surprised her with a picnic made entirely of scraps he'd saved from the diner where his mom worked. There were leftover rolls, a few slices of cheese, and half an apple. It wasn't much, but to Lily, it was a feast fit for royalty. She spread out an old towel on the floor, pretending it was a fancy tablecloth, and insisted they toast with mismatched cups of water. "To us!" she cheered, raising her cup high. Ethan joined in, laughing despite the ache in his chest. Even in their darkest moments, Lily had a way of finding joy. Her laughter was infectious, her optimism unshakable. And while Ethan carried the burden of adulthood on his young shoulders, he found comfort in knowing that he wasn't carrying it alone. Lily's love was a constant reminder that their bond was stronger than any hardship they faced. Some nights after Lily fell asleep, Ethan would sit by the window, staring out at the stars. He wondered if their lives would ever change, if the sacrifices he made now would lead to something better in the future. But no matter how uncertain things seemed, one thing remained clear. As long as Lily believed in him, he could face anything. Because in her eyes, he wasn't just a boy trying to survive. He was a hero. And sometimes, that belief was enough to keep him moving forward one step at a time. The bullying had become a part of Ethan's daily routine, like brushing his teeth or tying his shoelaces. He expected it, dreaded it, but never thought it would escalate to the point where he'd lose control. But one afternoon, something inside him snapped, and everything changed. It started innocently enough. Ethan was walking down the hallway, after gym class, clutching his books tightly against his chest. He kept his eyes on the floor, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by. The last thing he wanted was attention. But as he turned the corner near the lockers, Marcus and his gang appeared out of nowhere, blocking his path. They were laughing about something, their voices loud and obnoxious. When they saw Ethan, their laughter grew louder. "Well, if it isn't Trash Boy," Marcus sneered, stepping closer. "What's wrong? Too scared to look at us?" Ethan didn't respond. He tried to sidestep them, hoping to slip away unnoticed, but Marcus moved in front of him again, cutting off his escape. "Where do you think you're going?" Marcus asked, shoving Ethan back against the row of metal lockers. The sound echoed through the empty hallway, making Ethan flinch. For weeks, Ethan had endured their taunts and shoves without fighting back. He told himself it was for Lily. He couldn't risk getting suspended or expelled because she needed him. But today felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion weighing on him, the endless cycle of sacrifices and struggles. Or maybe it was the comment Marcus made next that pushed him over the edge. "You're such a loser," Marcus said, leaning in close. "No wonder your dad left. Who'd want to stick around with someone like you?" Those words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. His father's abandonment was a wound that hadn't healed, and hearing it thrown in his face felt unbearable. For a moment, Ethan froze, memories flooding back. The night spent wondering why his dad had gone, The unanswered questions, the loneliness. Marcus grinned, clearly pleased with himself. "What's wrong, trash boy? Cat got your tongue?" He shoved Ethan again, harder this time. That was when something inside Ethan broke. Without thinking, he balled his fists and swung, hitting Marcus square in the jaw. The impact sent Marcus stumbling backward, shock replacing his smug expression. His friends gasped, unsure what to do. Ethan didn't stop. All the anger, frustration, and pain he'd bottled up came pouring out. He lunged forward, tackling Marcus to the ground. Fists flew as the two boys wrestled, grunting and shouting. Students gathered around, forming a circle and cheering them on like it was some kind of spectacle. Teachers rushed in moments later, pulling Ethan off Marcus and separating the two boys. Both were breathing heavily, their faces flushed with adrenaline and fury. "What is going on here?" demanded Mr. Carter, the vice principal, his voice booming above the noise. Neither boy answered immediately. Marcus glared at Ethan, wiping blood from his lip, while Ethan stared at the floor, his chest still heaving. The crowd dispersed quickly as teachers ushered everyone back to class. Ethan knew he was in trouble. Big trouble. If he got suspended, who would take care of Lily? Later that day, Ethan sat in the principal's office, staring at the worn carpet beneath his feet. Across the desk, Principal Thompson looked stern but not entirely unsympathetic. "Ethan," she began, her tone firm yet calm. "This isn't like you. You've never been in a fight before. What happened?" Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. He could lie, say Marcus started it and leave it at that. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the weight of carrying secrets for so long, or maybe it was the realization that he couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. Slowly, he lifted his head and met the principal's gaze. I just couldn't take it anymore," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've been bullying me for months, calling me names, taking my stuff, pushing me around. I didn't want to fight back, I couldn't. But today..." His voice cracked, and he paused, swallowing hard. Principal Thompson studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "Why didn't you tell anyone sooner?" she asked gently. Ethan shrugged, looking down again. Because I have to take care of my sister. If I got in trouble, there'd be no one to look after her." The words spilled out before he could stop them, revealing pieces of his life he'd kept hidden for so long. When the meeting ended, both Ethan and Marcus were given detention and assigned community service as punishment. As Ethan walked out of the office, he braced himself for the fallout. Word of the fight spread quickly through the school, and by lunchtime, everyone was talking about it. Some students mocked him for finally standing up to Marcus, calling him a hypocrite for fighting after years of being passive. Others whispered quietly, their expressions unreadable. But amidst the chaos, Ethan felt something unexpected, a flicker of relief. For the first time, he hadn't backed down. He had stood his ground, even if it meant facing consequences. And, though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, he realized something important. Silence wasn't strength. Sometimes standing tall meant speaking up, even if your voice shook. The days following the fight were unlike anything Ethan had experienced before. News of his outburst spread like wildfire through the school, and for the first time, people began to see him differently. Some students still mocked him, calling him trash boy, or whispering about how he'd finally lost his temper. But others looked at him with curiosity, and even a hint of respect. It wasn't every day that someone stood up to Marcus, the self-proclaimed king of the schoolyard. What surprised Ethan most, though, was the attention from teachers and staff. Principal Thompson hadn't just let the matter drop after assigning punishment. She seemed genuinely concerned about what had driven Ethan to act out. During their meeting, when Ethan confessed the truth about his struggles, about caring for Lily, working tirelessly to keep their fragile family afloat, and enduring relentless bullying, something shifted in her expression. She didn't scold him or dismiss his words as excuses. Instead, she listened intently, nodding occasionally as if piecing together a puzzle. Word of Ethan's story made its way around the school. Not because Ethan shared it himself, but because Principal Thompson decided it was time for the faculty to step in. At an assembly later that week, she addressed the student body without naming names. "Bullying isn't just teasing or harmless jokes," she said, her voice firm yet compassionate. "It can hurt people deeply, sometimes in ways we don't understand. Before you laugh at someone or call them names, think about what they might be going through." Though Ethan wasn't mentioned directly, many students connected the dots. Whispers filled the hallways afterward, some sympathetic, others skeptical. For Ethan, this newfound spotlight felt uncomfortable. He didn't want pity or special treatment, he just wanted to survive each day without being noticed. But as the days passed, he realized that things were changing, slowly but surely. One afternoon, as Ethan sat alone during lunch, picking at the meager sandwich he'd brought from home, a girl approached him. Her name was Claire, one of the most popular girls in school. Ethan had seen her plenty of times before, always surrounded by friends and laughter. But now here she was, standing awkwardly beside his table, holding her tray. "Hey," Claire said softly, glancing around as if unsure whether she should sit down. "Can I join you?" Ethan blinked in surprise. Sure," he mumbled, scooting over slightly to make room. Claire sat down, placing her tray on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Claire cleared her throat and said, "I heard about what happened. With Marcus, I mean." Ethan stiffened, bracing himself for judgment or mockery. But Claire continued, her tone gentle. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About everything. I didn't know what you were dealing with, and honestly, I feel kind of bad for not noticing sooner." Ethan stared at her, unsure how to respond. No one had ever apologized to him for the way others treated him. "It's fine," he muttered finally, looking away. But Claire wasn't done. Over the next few days, she kept showing up, sitting with him at lunch, walking past his locker to say hello, even offering to help with homework. At first, Ethan was wary. Was this some kind of prank? Or worse, pity? He didn't trust it. But Claire proved herself genuine. One evening, while helping him study math in the library, she asked casually, "Do you ever need help with anything outside of school? Like babysitting or errands?" Ethan hesitated, caught off guard. "Why would you ask that?" he said, his voice tinged with suspicion. Claire shrugged, flipping through his textbook. "Because everyone needs help sometimes, and you've been carrying a lot on your own. Maybe it's okay to let someone else carry some of it for a change." For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to consider the idea. Could he really accept help? Would it make him weaker or stronger? That weekend, Claire came over to babysit Lily while Ethan caught up on sleep. To his amazement, Lily adored her immediately, chattering nonstop about her favorite books and toys. Watching them together, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, relief, and a tiny flicker of hope. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's life began to shift. Claire introduced him to other students who weren't part of the bullying crowd, widening his circle of acquaintances. Teachers started checking in on him more often, offering extensions on assignments when needed. Even Marcus and his gang seemed to back off, perhaps sensing that Ethan wasn't the same quiet target he used to be. Through it all, Ethan learned something important. Asking for help didn't mean giving up. It meant finding strength in numbers, leaning on others when the weight became too heavy to bear alone. And though life still threw challenges his way, he no longer faced them in silence. For the first time, Ethan realized he wasn't invisible anymore, and maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. With Claire's support, Ethan began to see glimpses of a life he hadn't dared to imagine before. For so long, he had carried the weight of his responsibilities alone, believing it was his burden to bear and no one else's. But Claire showed him that strength wasn't about doing everything by himself. It was about knowing when to lean on others. Slowly but surely, she helped him step out of the shadows and into a world where he didn't have to hide. One day, while they were studying together in the library, Claire glanced up from her notes with a thoughtful expression. You know, she said, tapping her pen against the table, you're really good at explaining things. Have you ever thought about joining the debate team? Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. Debate team? Me? He shook his head, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. I don't think I'm cut out for that. Why not? Claire pressed, leaning forward. You've got this quiet confidence about you, plus you're great at making arguments, even if you only use them inside your head. She grinned, nudging him playfully. Come on, just give it a try. What do you have to lose? Ethan hesitated. The idea of standing in front of people, speaking loudly and confidently, felt terrifying. He'd spent years trying to avoid attention, not draw more of it, but something about Claire's enthusiasm made him pause. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to attend one meeting just to see what it was like. Reluctantly, he agreed. At the first practice, Ethan sat near the back of the room, clutching his notebook tightly as he listened to other students deliver passionate speeches. Some were polished and confident, while others stumbled over their words, but all of them seemed fearless compared to him. When the coach called on new members to introduce themselves, Ethan's stomach churned. His palms grew sweaty as he stood, up, his voice barely above a whisper. But instead of ridicule, he received smiles and nods of encouragement. By the end of the session, he realized it wasn't as bad as he'd feared. Over time, Ethan grew more comfortable. With Claire cheering him on, he started participating in debates, learning how to structure arguments and articulate his thoughts clearly. At first, his speeches were shaky, filled with pauses and missteps. But each time he improved, drawing inspiration from his own experiences. One day, during a regional competition, he delivered a speech that left the audience stunned. Standing behind the podium, Ethan took a deep breath and began. We often talk about resilience like it's some kind of superpower, he said, his voice steady, despite the nerves fluttering in his chest. But the truth is, resilience isn't about being strong all the time. It's about getting back up after you fall, even when every part of you wants to stay down. He went on to share pieces of his story, not the full details, but enough to paint a picture of sacrifice, love, and perseverance. As he spoke, the room fell silent, every eye fixed on him. When he finished, there was a moment of stillness before the crowd erupted into applause. Ethan stepped away from the podium, his heart racing, unsure what to make of the reaction. Claire, sitting in the front row, beamed at him, giving him 2 thumbs up. Even Marcus, who had shown up reluctantly to support a friend competing in another category, looked uneasy, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of guilt in the boy's eyes, a realization perhaps of the pain he had caused. Back at school, Ethan's newfound confidence began to ripple through other areas of his life. Teachers noticed the change, praising his participation in class and encouraging him to take on leadership roles. Students who once dismissed him now sought him out for advice or simply to chat. Though the transformation wasn't overnight, Ethan found himself stepping into a version of himself he barely recognized, one that stood tall, unafraid to speak his mind. Even Lily noticed the difference. "Brother, you seem happier lately," she said one evening as they sat together reading bedtime stories. Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Maybe I am," he replied softly. For so long, he had believed that happiness was a luxury he couldn't afford. But now, surrounded by unexpected allies and opportunities, he realized that joy could coexist with struggle. Life would always have its challenges, but with Claire's friendship and the skills he was developing, he felt ready to face them head-on. As weeks turned into months, Ethan continued to grow, not just as a speaker or a leader, but as someone who refused to let circumstances define him. The bully. By senior year, Ethan was almost unrecognizable from the boy he had been just a few years earlier. The scrawny, quiet kid who used to shrink into the background was now someone who commanded attention, not through loudness or arrogance, but through quiet strength and authenticity. He still carried the weight of responsibilities on his shoulders, but they no longer crushed him. Instead, he wore them like armor, proof of everything he had overcome. The debate team became Ethan's sanctuary. It gave him a platform to express himself in ways he never thought possible. Each competition pushed him further out of his comfort zone, forcing him to confront fears he didn't even realize he had. At first, public speaking terrified him. The idea of standing under glaring lights with dozens of eyes fixed on him made his stomach churn. But as he practiced and grew more confident, he discovered something remarkable. When he spoke about things that truly mattered, his struggles, his sacrifices, his love for Lily, it wasn't fear he felt anymore. It was power. One evening, during NAR, the biggest tournament of the season, Ethan delivered a speech that would change how people saw him forever. The topic was resilience, something he knew intimately. As he stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces, he took a deep breath and began. "Resilience isn't about pretending you're okay when you're not," he said, his voice steady and clear. "It's about finding light in the darkest moments and holding on to it even when it feels like the world is against you." He shared snippets of his life. Not all the details, but enough to paint a vivid picture. He talked about waking up early to care for Lily, enduring relentless bullying and sacrificing pieces of his childhood to keep their fragile family together. His words were raw and honest, resonating deeply with everyone in the room. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before the audience erupted into thunderous applause. Even the judges, usually stoic and composed, exchanged glances, visibly moved. That night, Ethan didn't win first place, but he didn't need to. Walking off the stage, he felt a sense of pride he hadn't known before. People lined up to congratulate him, shaking his hand and telling him how inspiring his speech was. Among them was Marcus, who approached hesitantly, his usual swagger replaced by an awkward shuffle. Good job out there," Marcus mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Ethan nodded, surprised but grateful. "Thanks," he replied simply. Though Marcus didn't say much else, his presence alone spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of past wrongs and perhaps a step toward redemption. Back at school, Ethan's transformation continued to inspire those around him. Teachers praised his dedication, while students admired his humility and courage. Claire remained a constant source of support, cheering him on at every turn. Together, they organized fundraisers to help families in need, including Ethan's own. With the money raised, Ethan's mother was able to pay off some of her medical bills, easing the financial strain just enough for them to breathe easier. Even Lily noticed the shift. One afternoon, as they walked home from school, she tugged on his sleeve and said, "Brother, do you think we'll ever be rich?" Ethan chuckled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Maybe someday, Lil Sunshine. But remember, being rich isn't always about having lots of money. Sometimes it's about having people who love you and believe in you." Lily tilted her head thoughtfully, then grinned. "Well, we're definitely rich then." As graduation approached, Ethan reflected on how far he'd come. The bullies who once mocked him were now distant memories, their taunts fading like echoes in the wind. He no longer cared what they thought of him because he knew his worth. More importantly, he had learned to forgive not just others but also himself. For so long he had blamed himself for things beyond his control, his father leaving, their financial struggles, the loneliness that came with carrying such heavy burdens. But now he understood that forgiveness was a gift he could give himself, freeing him from the chains of guilt and shame. On graduation day, Ethan stood among his classmates dressed in a slightly worn but neatly pressed gown. As names were called one by one, he clapped enthusiastically for each graduate, proud of how far they had all come. When his name was announced, Ethan Carter, he stepped forward, his heart pounding with excitement. Crossing the stage, he scanned the crowd, locking eyes with Lily, who waved frantically from the front row. Beside her sat his mother, tears streaming down her face, and Claire beaming with pride. As Ethan accepted his diploma, he whispered to himself, "We did it." It wasn't just him. It was Lily, his mother, Claire, and everyone who had supported him along the way. Together, they had built a foundation strong enough to withstand any storm. And though the future remained uncertain, Ethan faced it with hope, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't have to face them alone. Graduation wasn't just the end of high school for Ethan, it was the beginning of something new. As he stood on the stage, diploma in hand, he felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: pride, relief, and a touch of nervousness about what lay ahead. For so long, his life had been defined by struggle, by the sacrifices he made for Lily, the bullying he endured, and the weight of responsibilities that left little room for dreams. But now, standing there under the bright lights, surrounded by cheering classmates and loved ones, Ethan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, brighter days were waiting. The weeks following graduation were a whirlwind of change. With Claire's help, Ethan applied for scholarships and grants to attend community college. It wasn't the glamorous university experience some of his peers dreamed of, but it was practical, and most importantly, affordable. On the day he received his acceptance letter, Ethan sat alone in his room, staring at the envelope for several minutes before opening it. When he finally read the words confirming he'd been accepted, tears welled up in his eyes. For the first time, he dared to imagine a future where he could build a better life, not just for himself, but for Lily too. Lily, now 9 years old, watched her brother with wide-eyed admiration. She didn't fully understand what college meant, but she knew it was important. "Does this mean you're going to be a teacher?" she asked one evening as they ate dinner together. Ethan smiled, shaking his head. "Not exactly, little sunshine. I'm thinking about studying social work. That way I can help people who are struggling, kind of like how I used to feel." Lily nodded seriously as if considering the idea. "That sounds perfect for you," she declared, taking another bite of her sandwich. Ethan's decision to pursue social work stemmed from his own experiences. He understood what it was like to feel invisible, to carry burdens no child should bear. If he could use his story to make a difference, even in small ways, he wanted to try. Claire encouraged him every step of the way, reminding him that his resilience made him uniquely qualified for the job. "You've already helped so many people without realizing it," she told him one afternoon while they studied together. "Imagine what you'll do when you actually set your mind to it." Of course, life wasn't without its challenges. Balancing classes, part-time work, and caring for Lily required careful planning and endless determination. There were late nights spent studying after Lily went to bed, early mornings spent preparing meals, and weekends filled with errands and chores. But Ethan handled it all with the same quiet strength he'd always shown. He reminded himself daily that these efforts weren't just for survival. They were investments in a brighter future. One crisp autumn morning, as Ethan walked Lily to school, she looked up at him and said, "Brother, do you think we'll ever live in a castle?" Ethan chuckled, remembering their childhood game of pretending their tiny apartment was a grand palace. "Maybe not an actual castle," he replied, squeezing her hand. "But someday we'll have a home big enough for all our dreams, and until then this is still our kingdom." Lily giggled, skipping ahead a few steps before turning back to shout, "And you're still the king." As the months passed, Ethan began to notice subtle changes in his family's situation. His mother's health improved, allowing her to return to work full-time. The extra income, combined with the money saved from Ethan's scholarship, eased the financial strain that had haunted them for years. They couldn't afford luxuries yet, but they no longer worried about where their next meal would come from or whether the electricity would stay on. These small victories felt monumental, proof that perseverance paid off in ways both expected and unexpected. Looking back, Ethan realized how much he had grown, not just in age, but in spirit. He wasn't the same boy who once cowered in hallways, afraid of bullies and burdened by shame. He had learned to stand tall, to speak up, and to find strength in vulnerability. Most importantly, he had discovered that love, whether for a sibling, a friend, or oneself, was the greatest force of all. It carried him through the darkest moments and gave him hope when hope seemed impossible. On a quiet evening near the end of his first semester, Ethan sat by the window with Lily curled up beside him, reading one of their favorite books. Outside, the world buzzed with activity, but inside, Everything felt calm and right. Ethan,